Well, this is the time of year when some of you out there might have recently received a letter from the Canada Revenue Agency. And it really wasn't a hi, how are you kind of letter. It's audit time from the CRA. This is fairly common, but it can be scary. And we thought, better talk about this because quite a few people out there are getting these letters in this last little while. Jeff Glasner is with us now, a tax lawyer at Boughton Law. Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
You said this is a bit of a scary time for some people out there. Why is that?
Oh, it is. I can tell just by the phone calls I'm getting. But, you get that brown envelope in the mail. You open it up, and there's something in there. There's some numbers in there. They say they're reviewing a particular claim or maybe a general audit of everything you have. And, it looks scary.
It sounds scary just the way you're describing it like that. Okay, so obviously people call you right away because they're panicking.
Yeah.
What do you tell them?
Well, I tell them that they've done the right first step, that they've opened the envelope and that they've taken this on and they're looking for help on it because often it isn't as scary as it looks in the letter.
Okay, what are the red flags that do you know of that the CRA kind of looks for that might make somebody a bit of a target?
Well, those change from year to year, but there are certain claims that often get looked at. Childcare expenses, large donation receipts, employees claiming expenses like motor vehicle, people claiming their home office expense. Those are ones that are often looked at. Okay,
so let's say somebody got this letter saying, we have concerns about your return. How do you prepare? What's the next step that you take?
Well, if they're coming to me, we're going to talk about how that claim came about, why they thought they were entitled to it, and what sort of documentation they have to back it up. And we'll talk about how we're going to respond to the CRA, whether we need to ask for more time, what kind of package we're going to put together. And generally, because they claimed it on their return, they had some reason for claiming it. And if there's any gaps in the documentation, we'll work with them with ideas of how to fill that.
How much documentation do you need? Should you have everything, like every little thing, if you were going to respond to one of these questions from the CRA?
Does that put you in a better situation? Yes. Do you need it in order to have any success in handling one of these things? Not necessarily. I often tell clients when they call me, you know what, I'll work with whatever you've got. They apologize for throwing out a receipt. I said, there's nothing to apologize for. We'll work with what you've got, and we'll try to get you what you deserve.
Okay. I think the question that a lot of us have, though, when it comes to dealing with something like the CRA is there common sense used? Are they reasonable, or is it a scary process?
Two questions there. Definitely a scary process for a lot of people. Are they reasonable? Some of them are very reasonable. A lot of it is luck of the draw on who you're dealing with.
That's not very reassuring, Jeff.
Well, and I'll reassure you a bit more. You do get 3 kicks at the can, really. So if you look at a CRA tax dispute, you often are starting out dealing with a CRA auditor. And you'll go through that process. You may agree with what they do. You may partially agree. You may disagree altogether. But you have the option after they issue you a reassessment to go further and object to your assessment and deal with an independent CRA appeals officer. You go through the same process again. You present your evidence. You argue if necessary. You present your case law. And if you're not happy with the resolution at that stage, then you can file a notice of appeal to tax court.
Okay. All right. So there are a few chances there. So let's talk about being proactive here. So let's say I'm a small business owner. I don't ever want to receive one of those letters. How do I make sure that happens?
Well, I can't give you any method to avoid receiving it, but if you want to be prepared for it, we've already talked about record keeping. That's key.
Okay.
Keep everything. Keep it as organized as you can. If you don't have the resources to keep it organized, throw it in a box and we'll organize it later. But that's what's going to prepare you the best. You're also going to want to have good people to assist you in the process, whether it's an internal bookkeeper, an external bookkeeper, your accountant. If you have good professional advisors that you can rely on, that's going to make it a lot smoother of a process.
I love in your list of advice here that I have in front of me, number 1 on the list is open the CRA mail, which is that brown envelope. So does that mean that a lot of people don't?
It's amazing. A lot of people don't. And they have, their own issues with other things going on with their lives or past experience with the CRA that they tell me about, that they just can't handle the emotional commitment of opening that letter and having to deal with it. But
what? Is that like out of sight, out of mind?
Exactly. But often those letters are, I would almost say always, have time limits in them. And you do need to respond. It's one thing to be right. It's another thing to go through the process to resolve your dispute.
Okay, so step 1, that's good advice then. Open the envelope. it can never be really as bad as what you might think it is, right?
You certainly need to open the envelope. You certainly need
Jeff's
to
like, I am not promising you anything on that front. You have to
I can't guarantee
envelope.
it's not as bad, but I can guarantee you're not going to get anywhere if you don't deal with the issue.
What are some of the mistakes that you think people make in terms of dealing with the CRA?
Well, along the same theme, a lot of people think they're correct on a matter, and a lot of people may be correct that they are correct on the matter. But you still need to engage the CRA in the process, respond to them, and show them why you're correct. You can't just ignore it and say, oh, I was right to claim that, and hope that nothing bad happens. Because if you're not going to respond, the CRA is going to take the next logical step, and they're going to assess you to deny whatever you were claiming.
Do you have to participate in the process in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah, you do, or you have to have a representative like a tax lawyer or your accountant assist on your behalf.
You must deal with a lot of stubborn people, because I imagine that is probably people's first reaction is, no, I was right and they're wrong, because it's the tax man. Everybody says that.
It does happen. There's a lot of themes to the telephone conversations I get.
Oh, let me hear some of the other themes.
A lot of people dealing with this process will tell me that they're having trouble sleeping. It comes up all the time. And my response to them is it can be a drawn-out process, but you've come to me, you've come to your accountant, you're doing everything that you could possibly do to work and try to resolve this matter. So for that, at least, you can feel good about what you've done to this date.
You talk about record keeping and how important that is. When it comes to record keeping, is there some mistakes that people make? Do they throw away receipts? Like what are the most common mistakes when it comes to record keeping?
Well, there's some people out there who think they only need to keep their receipts for a year or two and then they get rid of them. Really, we should be keeping stuff as long as we can, as long as we have room for it. There's some rules about 6 years, there's some rules about longer, but I would always suggest just keep everything for as long as you can. And again, if you don't have the resources to organize it, just throw it in a box. We'll worry about organizing it if and when it ever comes up.
So when you say keep everything, you're talking about anything that is related to expenses that you are claiming on your taxes? Well,
it's both expenses, and if we're talking small business, it can be revenues as well. Copies of your invoices to your clients, which you may think that you don't need once they've paid your bill, but at times it does come back into play. Often it does.
What are some of the long-term implications of the audit process? Like if you go through it once, does that make you a target that you're going to have to go through it again?
It could. There's no guarantee one way or the other. One might say that, well, if they've looked at my donation receipts for 2015 and I've showed them I had every penny of it, then, their resources should probably be targeted at other people. But there's other ones like business audits where I'll do an access information request after the audit. I will see that they've put a follow-up notice in this client's file to look at it again in 2017, 2018, 2019.
Oof. Okay. So if there's a problem, if it's resolved successfully, is that okay? Like sometimes I get these are routine and sometimes it's a red flag, right? Like there's a difference in the type of audits that they do.
Right, certainly. If it's an issue of law, I deal a lot with individuals claiming the Indian Act tax exemption. And it's just an interpretation of the law, whether it applies to their circumstances. And if we're at the appeals level and we are successful with the appeals officer convincing, yes, the law applies to my client, he's exempt, she's exempt from income, they probably won't look at that again. But if it's someone with bad bookkeeping issues and they don't have expense receipts, they may want to check in again in a couple of years to see if they've improved.
So essentially, then when you go do that interview process, when you work through the audit process with the CRA, you may inadvertently create more red flags for them to come back the next time.
Well, it's part of managing the process. There's a lot of discussion that goes on with the client before we start meeting with the CRA. We discuss what issues there may be, and we anticipate the best way to mitigate the damage or to resolve it ahead of time.
Like, let's go in looking organized. Let's go like we have all these receipts. Let's look like we were prepared for all of this, that kind of stuff?
That certainly helps, yes.
Okay. So how long does this process generally take?
Oh, well, listen, I spoke about 3 kicks of the can. Those 3 kicks can take 4 years. A typical audit could take anywhere from a couple months if it's just a desk audit on a particular subject, or it can take over a year if it's multifaceted dealing with a small business.
Whoa, okay. But your best advice, Jeff, then, if you're the unlucky recipient of one of those envelopes at this time of year, is open it, take a deep breath, and then what? Open it,
Take a deep breath, talk to your accountant, talk to your tax lawyer.
Good advice. Jeff, thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
And for your time today. That is Jeff Glasner, tax lawyer at Boughton Law, as all part of CKNW's Business Legal Series as well. Some good advice there for business owners if you're receiving one of those envelopes at this time of year. We'll be right back.
This is News Talk 980 CKNW.